So, this is Imagining Our Deaths, Czeslaw Milosz's Dantean Consolations. Now, you all must be quite dedicated to poetry to come here and talk about how one Polish poet interprets another Italian poet. Right? You all must love poetry. Or perhaps you've been motivated by the offer of extra credit to be here. Or perhaps you just wanted to hear someone attempt to pronounce an apparently unpronounceable name. Czeslaw Milosz. You just kind of swallow the L's down your throat. Czeslaw Milosz. But whatever the reason, you are here and are more or less a captive audience for the next hour. I have you in my clutches, and you are at my mercy. But I promise, however, to be a beneficent tyrant, and will try to make what follows followable. I will do so by reading lots of poems with you, and trying to convince you, perhaps, that these poems may be relevant, even worth your attention. For although Milosz and Dante may be foreign, and also both dead, by the way, just in case your historical frame of reference is a little fuzzy, they are both human, and they both confront the central human realities of death, suffering, beauty, God, and the life to come. Moreover, they are both brutally honest about their failings. Remember Dante's opening line to the Infernal, the first part of his Divine Comedy. When I journeyed half our life's way, I found myself in a shadowed forest. For I had lost the path that does not stray. He has fallen asleep and fallen off of the straight and narrow right into a midlife crisis. The Divine Comedy is the story of his slow return to the true path. Likewise, Czeslaw Milosz is very honest about his failings and his shortcomings, his doubts and his uncertainties. As a 90-year-old, he writes the first poem on your handout. Imagine being 90 and writing this poem. I should now be wiser than I was, yet I don't know whether I'm wiser. Memory composes a story of shames and amazements. The shames I closed inside myself, but the amazements, at a sunstreak on a wall, at the trill of an oriole, a face, an iris, a volume of poems, a person, endure and return in brightness. Such moments lifted me above my lameness. You, with whom I fell in love, approach and forgive me my trespasses, because I was dazzled by your beauty. You were not perfect, but just that arch of eyebrow, that tilt of the head, that voice reticent and seductive, could only belong to a perfect creature. I swore to love you eternally, but later on, my resolution wavered. My fabric is woven of flickering glimpses. It wouldn't have been large enough to wrap a monument. I was left with many unwritten odes in honor of men and women. Their incomparable bravery, devotion, self-sacrifice passed away with them, and nobody knows of it. Nobody knows for all eternity. When I think of this, I need an immortal witness so that he alone knows and remembers. This is the late Milosz. The poem praises the beauty of being, the oriole, the iris, the woman's face. These moments lift him above his lameness, yet he is lame, and he knows it. In ironically ringing self-diagnosis, he admits, I swear to love you eternally. But later on, my resolution wavered. In the midst of these shames and amazements, he needs an immortal witness who can properly recognize the tragedies and heroics of humans. But does such a witness actually exist? Milosz isn't sure. In the poem which precedes what we've just read, and all these poems come from his collection Second Space, which I'll be talking about more about this line in particular, but they all come from this. In the poem that precedes what we just read in the collection, Milosz claims that, quote, what fits me is a skeptical philosophy, end quote, which doesn't get entangled with the God man created. Yet despite this, Milosz repeats in the poem, quote, I believe in God, and I know that my belief has no justification. How are we to resolve this tension in Milosz's final collection? Does he believe in God? Does he think the world is beautiful and underwritten by divine plenitude? Or is it merely the devil's vaudeville, the devil's variety show, as he confesses he's tempted to think? Drawing out Milosz's references to Dante will help us in deciphering his complex answers to these questions. References to Dante, to Dante's great work, the Divine Comedy, which many of you have read with me in world literature, his great medieval epic, A Journey Through Hell, Up Through Purgatory and into Heaven. Right? References to Dante in Milosz's Second Space help us decipher what Milosz is really saying in this collection. As the 91-year-old Milosz wrestles with death, evil, and the problem of suffering, he turns to images from the Divine Comedy to express both the infernal nature of modern existence, the hellish quality to our existence, and his wavering hope in paradisal consolations. Tracing out the Dantean resonances of second space illuminates, I submit to you, the theological depth of Milosz's final collection. First, however, a brief bit of background on this poet with the hard-to-pronounce name. It says, while Milosz was born in Lithuania in 1911, he published his first poems in 1931, before most of your grandparents were born. Right? His first collection of poems, and his last collection of poems was published the year he died in 2004, at the age of 93. So from 1931 to 2004, he was writing poetry. Chronologically, he spans the 20th century. He spans it geographically as well, growing up as he did in Poland. His part of Lithuania became Poland soon after he was born, on the border between East and West. Milosz lived through Nazi occupation and Soviet domination, witnessing firsthand the destructive aspects of fascism and that he would claim more sophisticated and insidious historical rewritings of communism. A cultural ambassador for the Polish regime in the 50s, Milosz defects, writing The Captive Mind, a brilliant critique of dialectical materialism, which was the official artistic theory promulgated by the Soviets. Exiled from Poland, declared a non-entity by the government, Milosz comes to rest finally in Berkeley, at UC Berkeley, where he teaches for 40 years in the Slavic languages department. He continued to write his poems in Polish, although they were officially banned in his homeland. Indeed, Milosz believed his poetry at this time was read by nobody. He's writing in Polish in California, so nobody's reading his poems in Polish there, and they can't be printed back in Poland. So to his mind, he's writing in Polish, but for no one. There's absolutely no one reading it. And so there are stories of when he goes to Paris and meets with some young Polish dissidents who start to recite his poetry line by line because it's being circulated in the underground there. Milosz just starts weeping because someone's actually reading his stuff. He thought he was totally alone. For his 60th birthday, he got 0 birthday cards. Not one letter. All by himself in California, writing mine. So, as I said, the underground press in Poland continued to publish Milosz's work, and as the Iron Curtain began to rise, he's allowed to return to the country and received in 1980 the Nobel Prize in Literature. He continued to write into his extended years, becoming with Second Space, the collection today we're going to talk about, became, quote, one of the great poets of old age, according to Adam Zagajewski. Seamus Heaney, the Northern Irish poet, claims that Milosz is, quote, the great secular poet, because his life keeps step with the development of the 20th century. Paired with this chronological connection to the 20th century is Milosz's connection to the central questions of the century we've just finished. Zagajewski argues that Milosz's poetic power lies partly in the fact that, quote, his mind seemed to be the ideal place, the exact address of the main spiritual struggle of the 20th century. The struggle not only about whether God exists, but about whether anything called man exists, or beauty, or goodness, or truth, or even being. About whether choice is an illusion or not, about language and its ability to be anything other than self-referential. This spiritual struggle is at the heart of Second Space. In the collection, Milosz acknowledges the communal loss of belief while simultaneously confessing his own doubts. So perhaps the best place to begin with is the title poem of the collection, Second Space, which also happens to be the first poem in the collection, and is the second poem on your handout sheet. Just turn the page. There we are, Second Space. Second Space. How spacious the heavenly halls are. Approach them on aerial stairs. Above white clouds, there are the hanging gardens of paradise. A soul tears itself from the body and soars. It remembers that there is an up and there is a down. Have we really lost faith in that other space? Have they vanished forever, both heaven and hell? Without unearthly meadows, how to meet salvation? And where will the damned find suitable quarters? Let us weep, lament the enormity of the loss. Let us smear our faces with coal and loosen our hair. Let us implore that it be returned to us, that second space. Now, I want to point out to you here how the form of the poem itself reiterates the content. The old confidence, the old cosmos with its up and its down, its heaven and its hell, the cosmos of the first 2 stanzas has 3 lines. But the moment that Milosz turns to our loss of belief, we drop the 3rd line in the stanza. They go to 2-line stanzas. Something is quite literally lost on the page. There's a line missing from all the rest of the poem. Just like Milosz thinks this second space is missing. Yet perhaps that other space can be returned to us. Every line of the poem ends with final punctuation. Period, exclamation point, question mark, a full stop. Elsewhere in the collection, Milosz will say, quote, "When the heart stops, my contemporaries say, shrugging their shoulders." That's it. Full stop. The end. Death. Life over. And every line of the poem replicates this full stop, this finality. Every line except the end, where Milosz hopes, indeed prays for something more, and the line opens out into a comma. A pause, after which follows that second space, the very continuation for which he hopes. Yet the question remains for Milosz, even if we have such a second space, if it exists, what kind of space is it? Are we in heaven or are we in hell? And Milosz isn't sure. He doesn't know. Because he knows himself, he's fairly confident of the possibility of hell. Quote, "I feel in myself so much veiled evil that I do not exclude from myself the possibility of hell. It would probably be the hell of artists, i.e., people who value the perfection of their work over their duties as husbands, fathers, brothers, citizens." This brutal honesty in self-assessment is, to my mind, one of Milosz's compelling virtues. To get at the infernal nature of the world in Milosz's poetry, it is helpful to turn, as he does, to the Inferno itself, Dante's grand imagining of hell. Milosz explicitly and implicitly turns to Dantean images to articulate the second space, and one such resonance is present, although veiled, in the poem we just read. The soul carrying itself from the body, remembering that there is an up, and there is also a down. The pit of hell, the center of the world in Dante's cosmos, the frozen, hairy Satan who lies wedged down there in the ninth circle with the traitors, eternally munching on Brutus, Cassius, and Judas Iscariot. The point, Virgil tells Dante, the point, quote, "to which from every part all weights are drawn." The bottom floor of the universe, the down, the center. That's the down in Milosz's poem that the soul remembers. And it's these kind of infernal images that Milosz recapitulates throughout his final collection. The poem Framing provides a good example of how this works. And this is the next handout, the next item on this page. Framing. The poem begins with a quote from a 1939 French geography. "Poland is a marshy country where Jews live." An ominous opening with that date, if you know anything about Poland in 1939 and the Jews who lived there. And the opening lines of the poem fulfill that expectation. Tragedy, Patrick, needs a proper framing of fractured rocks and abysmal chasms. But I was describing a sandy plain, geese on a strip of grass, the grayness and indistinctness of a country hardly heard of, for its sadness has no hands, no faces. I had to write, Patrick. I was called, or compelled by pangs of conscience. I tried as I could, in anger and impotence, without believing anybody in the world needed it. You know how powerfully we are moved by causes other than the love of beauty. A style even gains by such deviations from the rules of modernism under the force of passion. Fickleness, I had a touch of it. Also trinkets disguised my misery. I could hardly stand peeling walls, dirt, garbage heaps, ugliness, which seems to invite misfortune. But it was the given, and no water could wash away what was branded in our memories. Something had to be done with it. Something had to be done. The fractured rocks and abysmal chasms of the first stanza are the landscapes of the Inferno, where Dante and Virgil descend down the great spiraling valley of the damned, with its cliffs and boulders buffeted by winds and the tormented shrieks. The force of the poem lies in the fact that Poland does not provide such a grand landscape for tragedy. It is a sandy plain, a place nobody's heard of. And yet no amount of scrubbing can wash away the atrocities of the Holocaust, an event made all the more awful by its unsuitedness to its landscape. Lest we think that Milosz preserved this hellish imagery only to describe the Nazi atrocities, it's instructive to look at his poem Classmate, in which the poet dreams of a former schoolfellow as he's walking, quote, through a labyrinth of escalators from a pit to a pit. Again, recalling the way in which the 9 circles of hell lead into each other, and perhaps particularly referencing the 8th circle of hell, with its 10 little malabulges or evil pockets, which are kind of arranged on a stair-step pattern going down, where there's a lip to each stair-step. And so Dante and Virgil are constantly scrambling down, further and further into the next hole. As Milosz reflects on the dream and wonders about his classmate's fate, he makes the reference to the Inferno explicit. Quote, "So that it falls to me to count her scattered bones. A descent into a Dante-esque dark hollow somewhere near Archangel or Kazakhstan. She should have been buried in Rasa, in the cemetery, but an evil fate, no doubt, carried her out of town." Here, the Soviet gulags are framed as hell proper. Unlike the earlier poem of the Holocaust, Milosz identifies Stalin's death camps as appropriately hellish, suitably tragic, and remarkably widespread, ranging all the way from Archangel in the frozen Arctic north down to the southern steppes of the Kazakhs. But the language and images of hell are not used only for the great genocides of the 20th century. As we've seen, Milosz recognizes the possibility for hell inside himself. In Hear Me, a psalm-like plea for deliverance from temptation, he asks that God protect him from the day when, quote, "I am ready at last to bow down to nothingness and call life on earth the devil's vaudeville," end quote. In this hellish world, Milosz holds on to religion even when he fears that it's merely a human construct, that, quote, "people are created by people and together they create something called the truth," end quote. Even if that's true, even if we just make up goodness and beauty and truth in God, even if that's true, and he hopes it isn't, Milosz still holds religion in high regard since it makes the awful world bearable. The next poem on your list. Religion Comes. Religion comes from our pity for humans. They are too weak to live without divine protection, too weak to listen to the screeching noise of the turning of infernal wheels. Who among us would accept a universe in which there was not one voice of compassion, pity, understanding? To be human is to be completely alien amid the galaxies, which is sufficient reason for erecting, together with others, temples of an unimaginable mercy. In the poem, Dante's cosmos, with its music of the spheres, with its spinning heavenly circles moving in harmony with the divine will, is perverted, and instead of a grand song of praise, the universe becomes a mechanized instrument of torture, screeching as it turns. Religion in this situation is necessary because the world's pretty awful. Death and suffering are inevitable. Indeed, death is one of the great unifying themes of the collection. Not surprising for a poet writing at the age of 93. "Oh yes, you must die," Milosz repeatedly reminds us. In a chilling poem, he likens death to a border. On our side of the border, a lush green jungle, tropical, over which we soar like birds. On the other side, quote, "nothing. Nothing to be touched, seen, tasted, heard." We prepare to go there reluctantly, like immigrants who do not expect happiness in the country of our exile. This is what Milosz fears the world is. This is the skeptical philosophy that he's discovered suits him best. But there is another Milosz in the collection. There is the man who repeats, "I believe," even though he knows his belief has no justification. And that Milosz uses the language of Dante's Paradiso to articulate and frame his confession. Particularly, he draws on Dante's articulation of light and form. So I'll very briefly outline how Dante uses those in the Paradiso before turning to how Milosz takes them up in second space. Okay? So, for those of you who haven't read the Divine Comedy, Dante, we saw him at the beginning in the Dark Wood, takes a journey with his guide Virgil down through hell, where he sees all the torments of the damned, up through purgatory, where he gets a practical crash course in how to love rightly, how to order his desires and affections, and then up into the heights of heaven, where he has this mystical experience of the saints and God, and it ends with his grand vision of the Trinity and the Incarnation. But unlike the Inferno, Paradiso is not full of distinct images, where the Inferno is a collage of dramatic scenes of unrepentant sinners and awful punishments. And Purgatory is a kind of a how-to, a practical tutelage in learning how to love rightly. Paradise is a mystical meditation with a good bit of cosmological explanation thrown in. Botticelli's drawings of the Divine Comedy illustrate this point. This is the next page in your handout. Oh, the copy came through very clean. Where the Inferno and Purgatory are depicted in easily recognizable scenes, you see kind of faintly Lucifer in Botticelli's drawing, this great winged monster with his three heads eating the three sinners, frozen in the ice. dramatic image. But paradiso, and you can barely faintly see it on this side. It's Dante and Beatrice there, and there's these circles of light around them. Paradise is merely, in Botticelli's drawing, circle after circle of light, because that's all it is in Dante. All of Botticelli's drawings of paradise look like this, two figures in the middle and little flames of tongues of flame around them. Right? This could be sphere 5 or 6 or 18 or 23, it's hard to know. These dancing lights, which stand for the souls in heaven, are made all the more difficult to imagine when the reader learns, along with Dante, that all the souls are appearing to him in the spheres as he progresses, but that's not where they're actually at. They're actually up in the height of heaven. He's just seeing them in this differentiated and ordered way to teach him things about how heaven's organized. It's a very mystical sort of text. But as Dante journeys deeper and deeper into heaven, he's able to see better and better. In fact, his sanctification is connected and conceived in terms of sight. The holier he becomes, the better he can see. Beatrice's eyes are the prime example of this. In a place of overwhelming glory and radiance, it is in looking first at the light reflected in her eyes that Dante is able to look for himself at the light that she reflects. Dante bathes in the Empyrean stream at the top of heaven to, quote, make still finer mirrors of my eyes. An image which confesses both God's illuminating light and human agency in returning that light to God. The language of light reflection is one of Beatrice's main descriptions of the order of the cosmos. She concludes a discourse on the order of angels by telling Dante, quote, by now you see the height, you see the breadth of eternal goodness. It has made so many mirrors which divide its light, but as before, its own self still is one. This image of the created order, as so many millions of mirrors which reflect back the three-in-one God, leads us to the other great principle of Paradiso, form. Perhaps the best place to begin a discussion of form is right at the beginning of Paradiso, in the first terza rima. Quote, the glory of the one who moves all things, permeates the universe and glows in one part more and in another less. Note that God's glory is still conceived of as light here, glowing in all things, having permeated the whole universe, but glowing in a differentiated way, in one part more and in another part less. This differentiation follows from the variety of forms in the universe. To use the analogy we've already had with the mirrors, the universe may be so many millions of mirrors, but they're all different kinds of mirrors, and so they all reflect the one light back in a multitude of ways. Beatrice explains more later about this in Canto 1. Quote, all things among themselves possess an order, and this order is the form that makes the universe like God. That is to say, just as God is an ordered relationship of persons, existing in divine communion, so the universe is an ordered relation of forms. I want to stop for a second and just talk about form, so we're all on the same page. By form here, you can think back to your Aristotle and his 4 causes. Right? What causes a thing? Well, Aristotle says there's 4 answers to that. There's the material cause. What's it made of? What stuff is it made of? Wood, in this case. Podium, our table. Our tables, what, are plastic and wood and some metal bits, right? It's the material cause. What causes a table. But you also have to have a table maker, an efficient cause, someone who brings it into existence. You also have to have some kind of formal arrangement of parts, right? If you had wood and metal and screws put together by somebody, you could have a table, but you could also have a chair, or a shelf, or a desk, or a whole host of things. So what makes a table a table? That's the formal cause. The table has to have some order what makes it a table and not a chair or a shelf. It has to have a form. In this case, the form of a table, a flat surface with legs held off the ground. Something like that as a working definition for the form of a table. And lastly, final cause. What's it for? What's the point of a table? What does it do? What's its telos? What's its end? In our case, writing, holding our notes. Right? Other tables are for eating on, etc., etc. Right? This is what Beatrice means when she says form. By form, she means the various shapes or patterns in the world which mold matter into the particular shapes of a tree, a house, a table, a person, etc. All of these forms, she claims, possess an order, and, quote, within that order, every nature has its bent according to a different station, nearer or less near its origin. Therefore, these natures move to different ports across the mighty sea of being. The whole of the cosmos is moving toward the particular goal which God has given it as the kind of thing that it is. Beatrice here uses the image of ships bound for various ports. Okay, 2 points follow on from this, summarizing where we are so far. 2 points follow from this confession of form. First, everything ought to be loved, but differently with respect to the kind of thing that it is. Pizza and your mother are both good, and you ought to love both of them. And they're both from God, but you ought not to love them both in the same way. The way you love your mother is different from the way you love pizza. If you don't get that right, you end up eating your mother. Dante makes a beautiful confession on this point, the way in which all things ought to be loved according to the kind of thing they are. When, in responding to St. John's quiz on love, he says, "The leaves in leaving the tree of the everlasting gardener, I love them all according to the good he gave them." All the leaves on the tree of life, I love, proper to what kind of thing each one is. I love pizza as I ought to love pizza, and I love my mother as I ought to love my mother. Point 1. Everything ought to be loved with respect to the kind of thing it is, with respect to the form that it inhabits. Second point, the whole cosmos is on the move. All the forms of the world in their praise of God are sailing toward their various ports of call, crossing each other's paths in a dizzying harmony. The whole universe is revolving, not as one uniform circle, but as a million circles, each with its own orbit, and yet all interlocked and moving together. So Dante, at the height of heaven, looking into the heart of the Trinity and discovering there the Incarnation, breaks off his poem because he's passed beyond words, but is now moved like the rest of the cosmos. Quote, this is the very end of the whole Divine Comedy. Quote, "My desire and will were moved already, like a wheel revolving uniformly by the love that moves the sun and the other stars." Dante has moved from his bewilderment in a dark wood at the beginning of the Inferno to participation in the majestic harmony of the cosmos, a harmony which, as Dorothy Sayers points out, is both an external ordering of the forms of the world, the sun and other stars, and an interior ordering of the soul. It is Dante's desire and will which are moved to join the celestial chorus. Milosz takes up these terms of light and form from Dante, as we've just recapitulated them together, and he weaves them throughout second space. Now, in drawing out Milosz's paradisal consolations, I don't want to water down his doubt or make his tenuous belief appear more stable than it is. "I am not, and I do not want to be a possessor of truth," he says. "Wandering about on the outskirts of heresy is just about right for me." And yet, facing his age and his nearing death, Milosz leans on the Christian confession without entering what he denigrates as the serenity of belief. His poem on Old Women is perhaps the most obvious place to begin tracing out these paradisal resonances. And so let's read that together. It's the next page, poem 5. 6, rather. On Old Women. "Invisible, dressed in clothes too big for me, I take a walk, pretending I am a detached mind. What country is this? Funereal wreaths, devalued metals, a general avoidance of remembering what happened. I think of you, old women, silently fingering past days of your lives like the beads of your rosaries. It had to be suffered, endured, managed. One had to wait and not wait. One had to. I send my prayers for you to the highest, helped by your faces and old photographs. May the day of your death not be a day of hopelessness, but of trust in the light that shines through earthly forms." The poem begins right back with the infernal imagery of framing, with the heavy inheritance of fascist and Soviet brutalities, a place where people avoid memory. Incidentally, Milosz claims in his Nobel Prize lecture that chief among modern ills is our inability to remember, a failure to remember, the way in which we've lost our memories. But in the face of the suffering of the old woman, Milosz gives us a remarkably Dantean conclusion. Helped by their faces, just as Dante was helped by Beatrice's. By looking at their faces, the poet prays for a second space beyond death, a place of trust in the light that shines through earthly forms. This confession sounds to my ears like a direct echo of Dante's "The glory of the one who moves all things permeates the universe and glows in one part more and in another less." The same echoes reoccur in Eyes, a poem where Milosz deals with his old age and failing vision. So flip the page. Here's our next poem. Eyes. My most honorable eyes, you are not in the best of shape. I receive from you an image less than sharp, and if a color then it's dim. And you were a pack of royal greyhounds once. with whom I would set out in the early mornings. My wondrously quick eyes, you saw many things, lands and cities, islands and oceans. Together we greeted immense sunrises when the fresh air set us running on trails where the dew had just begun to dry. Now what you have seen is hidden inside me and changed into memories or dreams. I am slowly moving away from the fairgrounds of the world, and I notice in myself a distaste for the monkeyish dress, the screams, and drum beats. What a relief. To be alone with my meditation on the basic similarity in humans and their tiny grain of dissimilarity. Without eyes, my gaze is fixed on one bright point that grows large and takes me. Here it is precisely the moment of the poet's loss of vision that marks his inclusion within the divine harmony. The light with which paradisal is suffused enfolds the dying poet within itself. The point around which all the cosmos dances for Dante, around which he wheels in harmony at the end of his great epic, here welcomes the old Milosz, growing larger as he approaches nearer and nearer to his translation, in the ancient sense of the term, the movement of the soul from earth to heaven. With these hopes, tenuous though they may be, Milosz faces the bewildering world which is full of so much beauty and goodness, and full of so much suffering and evil. He faces it with acceptance but not understanding. He will not give up on the world and declare it only a devil's vaudeville, even though it doesn't make sense. He can only do what is assigned, only fulfill the forms he's been given. He does not understand, but he can participate. Last poem. To tell the truth. I've been saying this at the age of 93. To tell the truth. To tell the truth, I don't understand anything. There is only our ecstatic dance, a diminutive part of a great totality. They are born and die, the dance doesn't stop. I cover my eyes as if to protect them from the images rushing toward me. Perhaps I only appropriate the gestures, words, and actions, proper to the small patch of time assigned to me. Homo ritualis. Aware of it, I do what is prescribed for a one-day's master. There is only the dance of many ships across the great sea of being, a dance which goes on regardless, a dance from which we cannot remove ourselves. And so we must dance, we must inhabit the forms we've been given, the particular shape into which our life has been poured. For most of you, the form of student at this point. For all of this, at some point, the form of son or daughter, form of brother or sister, husband, wife, mother, professor. These forms we've been given, and do what is assigned to them. Ritual performing man, homo ritualis, a one-day master, deriving from the forms our gestures, words, and actions. The focus talk I gave last year, if any of you were there, explored the place of beauty, particularly with regard to form, as a tool for helping us understand our vocations. This talk provides kind of a companion piece to that one, but one focused on form with regard to doubt and death. Because for Milosz, form, ritual, the assigned words and gestures offer a means of participation even in the midst of unbelief. Quote, treat with understanding persons of weak faith, he pleads, myself included. One day I believe, another I disbelieve. Yet I feel warmth among people at prayer. Since they believe, they help me to believe in their existence, these incomprehensible beings. Naturally, I am a skeptic. Yet I sing with them, thus overcoming the contradiction between my private religion and the religion of the right. Participation in the forms of belief, the creeds, the hymns, the sacraments, and the lives of the saints and our fellow believers, in the grand pageant of the church, all of this blurs the line between what I believe and what we do together. Between private religion, my own doubts or faith, and our common work of ritual and praise. Milosz trusts in the forms and the light which shines through them, a light which others can see even when he cannot, a light which cannot necessarily be understood but can be dwelt in, a light to which we're all called. I'll end with one of Milosz's poems that draws not on Dante, although it does confess our common calling to the heavenly halls, but the referent in this poem, titled Late Ripeness, is to Christ's parable of the workers in the vineyard. You remember this one, right? The master of the vineyard goes into town at 6 a.m. and hires workers and says he'll pay them whatever. $10 a day. He goes back in at 8, gets more people, says he'll pay him $10 for the day. Goes back at 11, gets more. Goes back at 3 and gets more. Finally goes back at 5 p.m. and gets people. Everybody he says will pay $10. Whether you worked all day for 12 hours in the fields or for 1 hour at the end before sunset. The parable of the workers in the vineyard. That's the referent here. I won't read all of it, but here's the beginning and ending. And it's a fitting conclusion for Milosz's poetic life and his great, though troubled hope at paradisal second space. Not soon, as late as the approach of my 90th year, I felt a door opening in me, and I entered the clarity of early morning. One after another, my former lives were departing, like ships together with their sorrow. And the countries and cities, gardens and bays of seas assigned to my brush came closer, ready now to be described better than they were before. I knew, always, that I would be a worker in the vineyard, as are all men and women living at the same time, whether they are aware of it or not. Thank you. Thank you. There's a couple minutes for questions if anyone has questions. I see everybody basically managed to stay awake, so that's a win. Good work. All right. Well, yes, Zach.
So I can confirm for your mother that, in fact, you've made a public declaration that you love her more than pizza or just differently?
More than pizza, Dan. More than pizza. Yes, you can confirm. All right. Enjoy the rest of Focus. Go to many things. Go eat free food. Go eat pizza in the Gantt Art Gallery. Enjoy it like you should have eaten pizza.